I have another creepy story about Epping Forest. So this lady has DM'd me. She's from up north and her husband is an Essex boy and he grew up going to Epping Forest all the time. He says, why don't we go to Epping Forest? Let's do a nice family walk. And of course, she doesn't know any of the rumours. She doesn't know it's haunted. So she's like, yeah, I would love to do that. As they're pulling into one of the car parks in Epping Forest, she sees this guy walking towards the car. And this guy has this wide smile on his face. Almost like unnatural how happy this guy looks. And so instinctively, she just looks at her husband and he looks back at her and they're like, oh, what was that about? And her husband makes a joke and says, you know, that's just how fun Epping Forest is. Get into the forest and immediately she's like, this is not the vibes I was expecting. All of her alarm bells are going off, but for seemingly no reason. She gets distracted by a text message and her son and her husband walk off ahead. She starts to hear what she thinks is her little boy crying. She sees her son and her husband coming towards her and she's like, what's happened? And her husband says, oh, I didn't actually see exactly what happened, but he's saying someone bit him. At this point, their child was only 2 and he was only just learning to convey certain things. She kind of deduces that he's probably more than likely just fallen and scraped his hand. Nothing's actually bitten him. She gets down on her knees and she's looking. Starts to wipe a little bit of dirt off of his hand. And then as she looks up at her son, he has this big, wide grin on his face. And it makes her feel extremely uncomfortable. Her husband sees the smile and he says, oh, maybe it's just like an attention thing. But at this point, they're both kind of thinking he probably needs a nap. And so they put him back in the car and they take him home. After their Christmas visit is done, they go back to their own house. And several times over the next few weeks, when she is randomly busy doing something, she would look over at her son and he would have stopped playing and he would be giving her this big, unsettling grin. She feels really weird about it. She's thinking, if I spoke to anybody about this, they're going to think I'm absolutely crazy. That is until one night, her and her husband are sitting down to start watching a film. And her husband randomly, seemingly out of nowhere, looks at her and says, does the way he smiles sometimes creep you out? I went into his room the other night when he was crying. And when I got in there, he was just sitting up with this big Cheshire cat looking smile on his face. And it wasn't even just them that had started to notice it. Even the grandparents started to notice that sometimes he would just stop what he was doing and have this big creepy smile on his face. And eventually, after a few weeks, the smiling actually stops. And they're thinking, thank God. And then one night, they sit down in front of their TV and a documentary about the Kray twins and all these terrible gangsters comes on. In the documentary, they mention this thing called a Chelsea smile, otherwise known as the Glasgow smile. They Google the gang's affiliation with Epping Forest and they learned that the Krays, amongst lots of other gangsters that would commonly use this technique as a form of torture, would dump their victims in Epping Forest. One of the weirdest parts of the whole thing is that the guy that was coming out of the car park that had the original big smile that freaked them both out, they cannot agree with each other on whether they saw him on foot. She thinks it was on foot, whereas her husband says he was in a car, which in itself is, never thought I'd be scared of a smile. There we go.